Hi, and welcome back to my channel. My name is Demina Malord. I am a licensed mental health counselor, an anxiety and fear relief coach, and also an individual who is passionate about growing within self and sharing the knowledge. Welcome to my channel. If this is your first time here, welcome to this safe space. If you've been here before, so glad you made it back. Today is video two, part two in the Overcoming Guilt series. And in this video, I will be breaking down the frequently, well, actually, in the last video, I broke down the frequently asked question, can I stop feeling guilty? And you'll be able to see in the show notes below a link to that video, just linking it if you want to take a look at that if you have not already. Today, I will be talking about 3 tips to help you manage the feeling slash emotion of guilt in a creative and open-minded way. So for those of you that did have a chance to view part one of the video series, what I really dug into and talked about again, right, was answering the question, can can you stop feeling guilty? And so the information that I provided, I think, was pretty informational and just good to know, especially because the reality is that there are times when we experience emotions and feelings and they can be uncomfortable and unpleasant. And so just really wanted to share this information. So today, right, just as I'm sharing these tips, I definitely encourage you to, if anything, right, just listen to the information, take it in, make sure you're breathing through it, right? Pause as needed. But as you're listening to the information that I'm sharing, right, I want you to take what I'm saying with a grain of salt, which basically means, right, as you hear me, mentioning the tips and talking about the different parts of them, to take the parts that fit for you and for your life as you know it. And for the parts that don't fit for you, right, you can just lay them on down. You don't have to take everything all at the same time. And so just really want you to receive this information in a way that feels good for you, right, at a pace that feels good for you, just because this topic, right, the emotion and feeling of guilt can be so complex depending on what is causing you or what is causing that emotion to come up for you, depending on the situation, right? So, with that said, I just want to go over really quickly the definition of guilt that I talked about again in part one of the Overcoming Guilt series. So, this is the definition of guilt as I'm using it for the series. The definition of guilt is when your actions don't match up to your values. And it is I think, such a clear, simple definition because it really breaks it down into two areas: actions, values. And the thing is, depending on what is causing the guilt, like what situation is happening, where are you, who are you around, what setting are you in, it can be really a lot more easy to break down and to get to the bottom of what is causing the guilt, right? And so with this video, I'm going to be talking about some tips and kind of, kind of scratching the surface on them a bit. And so I am working on a couple of projects as well, just to increase the value of this information and to share more with those who are interested in diving a little bit deeper, but more on that a little later. So the first tip that I want to share with you today is the importance of acknowledging that the feeling of guilt exists within you. Okay. A lot of times what can happen is that as people naturally, when we encounter or have something, right, come into our space that either makes us feel uneasy or just is unpleasant or frustrating or irritating, we may not want to feel it. And that just makes you normal. That just makes you a human being, because the reality is, right, life can be pretty difficult at times. And there are times when it's like, oh, I really don't want to be feeling this emotion right now because it's really getting in the way. Like, I have to go run errands. I have to do this. I have to do that. Right. So if you find that, like, there are times when an emotion like guilt comes up and you're just like, oh, this is so annoying, I don't want to be dealing with this right now, just know you're one of many. And it makes sense. So as far as that being the first tip, it's super important, right, for all of us in our own ways to practice a concept that I talk about at times with my clients called radical acceptance. Now, the thing about accepting things is that there are times when it can be easier to accept certain things and not as easy to accept certain things, which is why I'm doing a whole series on overcoming guilt because it's such a complex topic, right? And it's important to break it down in a way that's understandable so that you can figure out how to just move through that emotion a bit more. For those of you that are familiar with my podcast, Grow Through This, which again the link is in the is in the bio. I really like to just dig into certain topics and not necessarily go surface level with them to help people increase their understanding of these topics that we talk about, experience, go through every day, right? And so, specifically with guilt and with certain feelings, sometimes it can be easier to accept certain feelings or emotions than others, right? Maybe you're a person who you really enjoy being celebrated, right? You really like if it's your birthday, you're going to have a birthday week and you just want all the glory and all the attention, right? Because you want to be celebrated. But maybe you're a person who you shy away from being in the spotlight, right? So that's just an example of how one particular matter or situation, right, which could be a birthday, how sometimes, right, somebody may feel really good about that or comfortable with it, and sometimes they may not. So just to translate that into excuse me guilt, right? Like sometimes, depending on where the guilt is coming from, again, right, setting, surroundings, it may be uncomfortable to like accept that you're experiencing that guilt within yourself just just as a human, right? Not putting um any additional thoughts into it. And I really think that the topic of radical acceptance is so important just to dig into, if anything, because there are times, right, when things happen and we just kind of have to accept it in a sense, like I just need to accept it and let it go, right? Like there are times when we can hold on to things that can weigh us down, sometimes physically, sometimes emotionally, right? So, for example, the topic of forgiveness, which is, in a sense, accepting and moving on, is a topic that is sometimes a little difficult for people to kind of dig into because sometimes, right, as people, we want to hold on to things. Maybe you want to hold on to a feeling or a memory of something to remind yourself of something, right? So, for example, let's say with guilt, right? Again, if we go back to the definition, when your actions don't match up to your values, if it's something related to maybe family, right? The family that you grew up in, the culture in the family that you grew up in. Let's say if you're an adult and you are doing something different than what you were taught or raised to believe or to do, naturally guilt may come up, right? Where your actions may differ from your values or your values as you were growing up. And so sometimes the importance of really breaking down, um, maybe even updating your values in real time with yourself, with your therapist, right, with a trusted person could help you understand how to incorporate that concept of radical acceptance with little judgment or minimal judgment. And that actually leads to tip two, which is decreasing negative self talk in the moment. Now, negative self talk, right? We all, in one way or another, have commentary with ourselves, right? You see something and you have a thought in your mind, right? Maybe you see someone and you're like, oh, wow, her hair is so beautiful. Or you see someone or you see something and you're like, oh my gosh, the sunrise is so beautiful this morning, right? So we're constantly having commentary in one way, shape, or form about things that we see or experience. And if we're talking about the feeling slash emotion of guilt, right? A lot of times what can happen is that people can automatically go into a negative self-talk commentary loop in their mind, right? Like, you're so stupid, why are you doing this? You shouldn't be doing this. You're disappointing so and so, like, you shouldn't be doing this. And so sometimes, right, we as people can have these thinking patterns in our mind and get stuck in these thinking patterns like a loop. right? Sometimes we may be able to get ourselves out of it to some degree, sometimes not so much. Sometimes we may not even recognize, right, that we have this negative self talk thinking loop. And the thing is, right, if that's the loop that you're in, that's the loop that you're going to stay in, likely, at least a higher probability, a higher chance that that loop will either continue or happen again, just like that in a negative way related to whatever situation is triggering or bringing up that feeling of guilt for you, right? So it's important to kind of have a bird's eye view, if you will, to figure out or to understand how to decrease the negative self talk in the moment, right? Which basically means that if the negative self talk starts, recognizing it in the moment to the best of your degree, which takes practice, okay, and consistency, knowing that growth can, kind of take a dive here and there, right? But on average, are you growing? Are you shifting your mindset, right? It's not always going to be sunshine and rainbows. It's not always going to be an upswing, and just recognizing that, accepting that, right? The radical acceptance as a concept, part of the journey and the learning process. Um, and so, lastly, the third tip for today is understanding what you can control. And I would like to add to that and say understanding how you can control what you can control, which that kind of piggybacks in a sense off of tip two, which includes understanding the concept of mindfulness, which is being able to stay focused, stay present in the moment, which is something that can be really, really tough to do, especially in this time. I live in America right now, and I can tell you that, generally, the nation, right, we have so many things going on to include social media, just fast paced lifestyle, and of course, right, maybe where you're living or where you're watching from, lifestyle may be different. So take what I'm saying with a grain of salt, right? But the point of what I'm saying is that there are times when we can get into habits of being forward thinking, thinking of the future. Oh, I got to get up. I got to make sure that I leave the house by so and so time. Okay, I have to make sure that I do this. I have to make sure that I do that. Okay, did I do this today? Did I do that today? Oh, shoot, I have to respond to that email, blah, blah, blah. Does that sound familiar in any way? Oh, I got to get the kids dinner. Oh my gosh. Da, 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 da. Does that sound familiar? Because if it does, it just means, again, that you are human. And what it also means is that you are a person who is thinking in the future. Sometimes what can happen is that when we think in the future, it can turn into a bit of a spiral, almost like a hamster on a hamster wheel. The way that I describe overthinking is like, right, so we have thoughts that come into our mind, right? Kind of like how I mentioned before, we have thoughts come into our mind, we'll have commentary on those thoughts, maybe, maybe not sometimes. But what happens is when you overthink, the way I describe it is that the thoughts are going into your mind at a faster rate, right? So it's like that sound. Every time I said that, I did that sound represented a thought. And so what can happen is that if we're in a setting, right? If we're in a situation and the feeling of guilt immediately comes up for us, right? What can happen is that the intensity of that emotion, if it reaches a point of no return for you, what can happen is that it can totally take you over like a wave and take you out of being present and focused in the moment, which is what can cause some of us to be really like maybe even spooked by the feeling of guilt, like, whoo, I don't even want to feel it. The last time I felt it, it was horrible, right? And so if that speaks to you in any way, one of the ways to understand what you can control and how you can control what you can control is to really practice staying present in the moment to some degree. Now, that doesn't mean that you're not allowed to feel the emotion of guilt. That doesn't mean that you're not allowed to like figure out how to work with it in the moment, right? But really what that means is that you creating some space by practicing, right? Having a form of accountability, which could be like a therapist or a membership program or a group of friends, right? To kind of bounce back, hey, okay, so this is the situation that happened. This is how I handled it. Okay, I see that I still have a growth area here, but I was able to, one of my wins was that I was able to excuse myself and go to the bathroom and just take a breather. I was able to excuse myself. I went to go take a breather. That helped me stay mindful in the moment. That helped me kind of get out of the setting and to just, get back into me. So as far as that goes, I'll just share a quick example, right? Sometimes, right, maybe if you are around your family, maybe the way that you are living your life is different than the way that you were raised. And maybe there might be some criticism or just feelings that can come up either from yourself or other family members when you're in this setting. And maybe you feel guilty because you set a boundary, right? Maybe these family gatherings, people are typically together for like 4, 5, 6 hours. And you just don't want to stay that long. Maybe you still have errands to run. Maybe you want to cut time short with the family so you can, incorporate some time for your honey or for a friend or for yourself, right? Maybe there's a show that you are in the middle of watching and you're like, oh my gosh, I have 2 episodes left. I need to watch it before Monday. Like, again, if any of this sounds familiar, it just means that you are one of many human beings who just wants to make time for things, places, and things as needed. And maybe your family, right? With all respect to them, right? Maybe they might not receive that the best way, right? Like maybe when you're there, you're like, hey, just want to let you guys know, right? Maybe you get there at 2 p.m. and you say to them, "Hey guys, just want to let you know, I gotta leave at 4. I'm not gonna be able to stay out. I'm not gonna be able to stay in my normal time." Maybe you get a little pushback from them. Oh, you're not gonna stay? Oh man, what? You too good for us, right? Like, and then immediately, what could come up? Feeling of guilt. Dang, maybe I should stay. Gosh, I know I want to watch those 2 episodes of my show, but is it really that important? I need to be here for my family, right? Like that is the loop that can sometimes happen in our minds with the way that we might think when that feeling comes over us. And so sometimes the feeling can take us over. Maybe it's a big wave, maybe it's a medium-sized wave, maybe it's a small wave. But either way, right? Part of that process includes acknowledging, right, that you're feeling the emotion and that it's there, recognizing that if you're noticing that there's any negative self-talk or just self-talk uh that doesn't at least create some balance, right? Almost like, well, okay, I was gonna leave at 4, but I could leave at 4:30, right? Which is compromise, right? Sometimes we may compromise and shift a little bit, right? Maybe you might say, okay, guys, I can only stay until 4:30, but that's it. All right, you got me for 30 more minutes, and that's it. I love you. Let's make this time matter. Let's make this time count, right? So, kind of being playful and knowing how to communicate and be creative and strategic in the moment, right? While also creating space for yourself and whatever else you have going on in your life respectfully. And so, right, just something to consider. Now, one of the things I do want to mention as I'm nearing the end of time for this video is that one of the most important aspects, one of the most important pieces of you overcoming guilt, right? Like you being on top, you putting guilt in its rightful place as one of the many emotions that we experience as people is the concept of shifting your mindset. Basically, meaning what are you setting your mind on when something comes up, right? How are you thinking about it? How does it affect your actions, what you decide to do? How does it affect your behavior? Do you get irritated? Do you get short? Are you able to really like talk through it, which is such a process? And just know you're not alone. We all have things that we are working on and growing through. And so, I just want to say that, take your time on this process and do the very best that you can. And with that said, so in the next video of the series, part 3, I will be sharing 3 realistic and doable tips to decrease automatic self talk. Okay. So that immediate negative self talk loop that just starts after feeling like guilt pops up. I really want to dig into that just because I think it's important to give those tips. Just if anything, just like quick tips that'll be super helpful in the moment as you're continuing your journey of managing and overcoming guilt. Okay. So, in the meantime, definitely take a look at my show notes. You follow me on social media, listen to my podcast, go through this, and contact me by email with any questions. Keep your head up. Totally appreciate you being here. Also, do not forget to subscribe, like, and turn on your notification bell just to be reminded of future videos coming up. But definitely super duper appreciate you being here. Feel free to share this video with anyone that you know that you think could really benefit from this information. Totally looking forward to seeing you at the next video. Feel free to leave comments as well if there are any topics that you're interested in me digging into. Appreciate you. Have a great day. Talk soon. Bye.